A billion-dollar secret. The mechanic who brought down an empire. The moment the mechanic arrived to fix the billionaire's jet, he was met with nothing but disdain. Yet, in mere minutes, he flipped the script, leaving everyone utterly stunned. A discreet yet audible chuckle echoed through the hangar as João Pedro parked his old pickup truck on the private airstrip of São Vicente Executive Terminal. Through the dark windows of the VIP terminal, impeccably dressed internal directors exchanged looks of astonishment and mockery. There stood the 38-year-old mechanic, his hands scarred from years of heavy labor, unloading his battered toolbox. "Is this the specialist they called for Mrs. Monteiros's jet?" Carlos Eduardo, operations director of Asas Douradas, asked, a barely concealed hint of disdain in his voice. "I thought they asked for the best technician in the region, not someone who looks like he just came from a roadside garage." João Pedro heard the comment, but remained calm. For him, this scene was all too familiar. What most ignored was that those experienced hands had rescued more luxury planes than the combined total of all certified technicians at that airport. 15 years fixing executive jets, 4 national awards for technical excellence, and still, his appearance spoke louder than his brilliant record. "Mrs. Monteiros's jet needs to take off in 2 hours, the runway supervisor said, maintaining a safe distance. "Our own technicians couldn't find the problem. If you don't fix it in time, we'll call the team from Rio de Janeiro." The Gulfstream G650 gleamed under the morning sun, a priceless, immaculate jewel. As João Pedro approached, he noticed eyes following him from the terminal windows. Critical, suspicious eyes, and one pair that stood out, observant, calculating, intrigued. "Tay, let him work." A firm, sharp female voice cut through the silence. Patricia Monteiros, 43, CEO of Asas Douradas, and owner of the jet, walked across the runway with determined steps. Her navy blue pantsuit contrasted with her perfectly styled brown hair. She did not look at the directors, only at João Pedro. "How much time do you need?" "It depends on the problem, madam," João Pedro replied, holding her gaze without hesitation. "You have an hour," Patricia responded, checking her wristwatch, which was worth more than João Pedro's entire annual salary. "Surprise me." As the directors retreated to the comfort of the air conditioning, João Pedro opened the main access panel and immediately understood the trouble. The pressurization system had suffered a catastrophic failure, which previous technicians mistook for a simple electrical issue. If the jet took off like this, the cabin would depressurize at over 40,000 feet, killing everyone on board. His hands moved with surgical precision. No one realized he wasn't just fixing, he was saving lives. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Patricia Monteiros watching him intently through the glass. Her gaze was different from all the others. It wasn't contempt. It was a silent recognition. 30 minutes later, the problem was solved. João Pedro closed the panel, wiped his hands on an old cloth, and began to pack his tools. His work was done. Thanks were unnecessary, as almost always. Doing an impeccable job was the least expected. Never a reason to celebrate. Then, Patricia Monteiros emerged from the terminal again, this time alone. She went directly to João Pedro, ignoring the curious glances of her team. "How long would it take for them to discover the real problem?" she asked, her voice controlled. "They would never have found it," João Pedro replied directly. "The jet would have crashed with everyone on board before that." The silence that followed was heavy. Patricia's eyes scrutinized João Pedro with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Come with me," she ordered, surprising everyone, especially Carlos Eduardo, who watched the scene with growing nervousness. What no one at that airport could imagine was that this moment was not just about a repaired jet or lives saved. It was the beginning of a story that would challenge old prejudices and reveal truths that the aviation elite had tried to hide for decades. The biggest one, the man who had just saved the jet had actually designed the pressurization system that equipped half of Asas Dorada's fleet. A system for which Carlos Eduardo had received all the accolades and promotions. The executive's eyes followed João Pedro and Patricia as they moved away from the jet, leaving a trail of gossip and whispers in the air. Carlos Eduardo, his face contorted into a mask of worry, was as tense as a violin string about to snap. "My office, now!" Patricia ordered, leading João Pedro to an area of the terminal where few employees had access. No word was spoken during the walk, only the sound of their footsteps echoing through the polished corridors. The private room was the perfect combination of luxury and practicality. Patricia closed the door, indicated a chair for João Pedro, and sat behind her desk. "Did you tell me your full name?" she asked, her eyes analyzing his every detail. João Pedro. A dense silence filled the room as she typed something on her tablet. Her eyes widened slightly. "João Pedro. JIP," she murmured. "Those are the initials engraved on all the original designs of our G7 pressurization system." João Pedro remained impassive, but his fingers tightened slightly on the armrest. She knew. 3 patents, 4 innovation awards, a master's degree in aerospace engineering from the Federal University. And yet you fix jets like a common mechanic? Why? Because no one hires a black engineer from the periphery to lead development teams, he replied bluntly. And mechanics also have bills to pay, Mrs. Monteros. Patricia opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside, there were company documents detailing the development of the G7 system, all signed by Carlos Eduardo as chief engineer. "Do you know how much profit this system has brought to my company in the last 5 years?" she asked, flipping through the documents. "Approximately $428 million, João Pedro replied. "The system reduced fuel consumption by 23% and maintenance costs by 30%. Patricia looked up, surprised by the accuracy of the answer. "Carlos received 3 promotions and a bonus of $2 million for his work," she continued. While I continued to fix jets," João Pedro completed, without any emotion. The conversation was interrupted by insistent knocking at the door. Carlos Eduardo entered without waiting for a response, his face a mixture of false concern and thinly disguised anxiety. "Patricia, the board is waiting for you on the video conference, and we need to discuss." He stopped when he saw João Pedro, his expression hardening. "What is he still doing here? Wasn't the service already completed?" "Actually, we were discussing intellectual property," Patricia replied calmly. "Specifically, the GC7 system." Carlos Eduardo's face visibly paled. "I don't understand what a mechanic would have to contribute to that discussion." "Really interesting," Patricia replied, showing him a diagram on her tablet. "Because I have here the original GC7 designs with the initials JP, and I just found out they belong to João Pedro, who worked briefly in the development department 5 years ago." "Patricia, this is absurd!" Carlos Eduardo forced a laugh. "He was just a technical assistant. The GC7 system was developed entirely by my team." At that moment, the door opened again. A middle-aged woman entered carrying a briefcase even thicker than Patricia's. It was Dr. Laura Mendonça, Asas Dorada's chief legal director, whom João Pedro recognized from company reports. "Forgive my delay, Patricia. I had to recheck the intellectual property records," she said, nodding politely to João Pedro, before turning to Carlos Eduardo with a cutting look. "And yes, I confirmed everything. The digital signature on the original files matches Mr. João Pedro. Not you, Carlos. Carlos Eduardo seemed to choke on his own words. This must be some mistake. He worked under my supervision. Any small contribution. Small? Patricia interrupted him, opening another file on her tablet. Carlos, I have your emails to HR recommending Mr. João Pedro's dismissal for technical incompetence, exactly 3 days after he submitted the complete G7 project to the internal system. João Pedro watched the scene with a calm that surprised even himself. 5 years ago, when he was escorted out of the building like a criminal, humiliated in front of the entire team, he had sworn that one day the truth would come out. He didn't expect it to be like this, or so suddenly. Mr. João Pedro, Patricia said, turning to him. Dr. Laura has prepared some documents. She'd like you to review them. Basically, we are proposing retroactive recognition of your authorship, financial compensation for due royalties, and a proposal. What kind of proposal? João Pedro asked, keeping his voice steady. The kind that makes history, she replied, before turning to Carlos Eduardo. Carlos, you are temporarily suspended from your duties, pending the conclusion of the internal investigation. Please hand over your badge to security. Carlos Eduardo wavered, his face a mask of contained rage. You can't do this. The board would never. The board will be informed in 1 hour. Patricia cut him off. And if you want to maintain any dignity, I suggest you walk out that door now, before I decide to call security. When Carlos Eduardo left, slamming the door with unnecessary force, Patricia turned to João Pedro and Laura. Now we can really begin. What happened in the next 2 hours would change not only João Pedro's future, but the entire power structure within Asas Douradas. As Laura reviewed the legal documents, João Pedro realized something surprising about Patricia Monteros. She wasn't just trying to correct a mistake. There was something more in her eyes, a recognition, a deeper understanding. What no one could have imagined was that Patricia Monteros held a secret of her own. Her folder contained not only the G7 system documents, but also a meticulous 2-year investigation into systematic patterns of discrimination and idea theft within the company itself. João Pedro was not the first, just the brightest, and the one who had left the most irrefutable evidence. And Patricia had patiently waited for the perfect moment to dismantle the entire system from within. Meanwhile, in the airport parking lot, Carlos Eduardo made a desperate call to his board colleagues. His empire was crumbling, but he still had an ace up his sleeve. Documents and alliances that could not only destroy João Pedro's career, but also bring down Patricia Monteros herself. What he didn't know was that every one of his moves was being monitored, every call recorded, and that the real battle was just beginning. Patricia Montero's private meeting room was a world apart from the rest of the airport. João Pedro, somewhat awkwardly, sat in the leather chair as she closed the door, isolating them from the bustle outside. The pressurization system you fixed, Patricia began. It's a modified version of the G7, isn't it? João Pedro kept his face impassive. Yes, madam. A system that Carlos Eduardo supposedly designed, and for which he received a millionaire bonus. She slid a folder across the table. A system that, curiously, has the initials JP on the original blueprints. Silence hung between them for a few seconds. 5 years ago, Patricia continued, you were a junior engineer at Asas Douradas. You were fired for technical incompetence 3 days after submitting a complete project to the development department. I have bills to pay, João Pedro replied calmly. Mechanics also pay bills. Patricia leaned forward. Do you know what else I found out, Mr. João Pedro? You weren't the only one. In the last 10 years, 7 talented employees were fired under similar circumstances. All black or brown, all soon after contributing significant innovations. The door opened, and a middle-aged woman entered carrying a tablet. "Sorry for the delay. João Pedro, this is Dr. Laura Mendonça, our new chief legal counsel. Laura has been conducting an investigation for the past 8 months. The lawyer nodded. "Mr. João Pedro, we have substantial evidence of systematic theft of intellectual property within Asas Douradas. Your case is just the tip of the iceberg." In João Pedro's mind, flashes of memory. The nights working alone in the lab, the excitement of solving the pressurization problem that no one else could. Carlos Eduardo's calculating gaze upon seeing the results. The public humiliation of being escorted out of the building. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I need your help," Patricia replied. "Carlos Eduardo controls half of the board. He has powerful friends. I need irrefutable proof to bring him down." "And what do I get out of this?" "Recognition, financial compensation for royalties, and," she hesitated briefly, "the position of Director of Innovation that should have been yours 5 years ago." João Pedro almost laughed. "Do you really think the board would accept a black mechanic as a director?" Patricia smiled for the first time. They'll have no choice when they understand what's at stake. Dr. Laura slid a document across the table. "This is a confidentiality agreement. Anything we discuss here." They were interrupted by insistent knocking. Carlos Eduardo entered without waiting for a response, his face a mask of false concern. "Patricia, the board is waiting. And why is this contractor still here?" "We were discussing the G7 system," Patricia replied calmly. Carlos Eduardo's face subtly paled. "I don't understand what a mechanic would have to contribute to advanced engineering." "Fascinating, isn't it?" Patricia showed him a diagram on her tablet. "These are the original drawings, with the initials JP. João Pedro was just a technical assistant." Carlos Eduardo forced a laugh. "Any small contribution." "Small?" Patricia interrupted him. "I have your email recommending Mr. João Pedro's dismissal for technical incompetence, 3 days after he submitted this project." Carlos Eduardo quickly regained his composure. "Patricia, we have an important video conference. The board won't wait while you listen to conspiracy theories." "Carlos," Patricia stood up, "you are temporarily suspended, pending the conclusion of the internal investigation." "You can't do this," he exclaimed. "The board would never—" "The board will be informed in 1 hour." Patricia cut him off. "I suggest you maintain some dignity and leave now." When the door slammed, Patricia turned to João Pedro. "We have 2 weeks until the shareholders' general meeting. We need concrete evidence by then." "I have something better," João Pedro finally replied. "I have the original G7 prototype, with my development records, dated and digitally signed. And what's more, I have recordings." Patricia's eyes widened. "Recordings?" "From 5 years ago, Carlos explaining how to erase my contribution from the company records, how to discredit me, word for word." Dr. Laura seemed impressed. "How did you get that?" João Pedro smiled for the first time. "I grew up fixing electronics in the poorest neighborhood in the city. I learned early on that people like me need insurance against people like him." What Patricia Monteros could not imagine was that João Pedro had not only kept evidence about his own case. In his 5 years working as a mechanic, he had meticulously cataloged every stolen patent, every appropriated idea, every talent wasted by institutional prejudice. His simple appearance was his best camouflage. While fixing Billionaire's jets, he secretly collected the fuel needed to bring down an entire system. Carlos Eduardo thought he was dealing with nothing more than a humiliated mechanic. He was about to discover that he was facing not just an engineering genius, but a patient strategist who had transformed 5 years of forced invisibility into the perfect weapon against those who underestimated him. 6 months later, Asas Durada's headquarters was unrecognizable. The executive floor, once occupied exclusively by white men, now reflected the diversity that Patricia Monteros had promised to implement. At the center of this new chapter was João Pedro, no longer an anonymous mechanic, but director of technological innovation, leading the division that had created the G7 system. The extraordinary shareholders' meeting, months earlier, had gone down in Brazilian corporate history. Patricia Monteros, with Dr. Laura by her side, had presented irrefutable evidence of systematic discrimination and intellectual appropriation, culminating in Carlos Eduardo's devastating recording. "We need to get rid of this pretentious mechanic," Carlos Eduardo's voice echoed through the packed auditorium loudspeakers. "Erase any trace of his authorship. Who would believe that a black man from the periphery created something so sophisticated? Our clients trust us, not people like him." The silence that followed was broken by a growing murmur of indignation. The company's shares plunged 18% that day. But what came next surprised even the most skeptical. "I could have sued individually," João Pedro explained in his first interview for the prestigious Teo Aberto magazine. But the problem was bigger than Carlos Eduardo. It was systemic. The solution proposed by João Pedro, and fully supported by Patricia, was revolutionary. Create a program to identify and reward all employees whose intellectual property had been appropriated in the last 10 years. More than that, establish an innovation fund specifically aimed at historically marginalized communities. Carlos Eduardo, in turn, faced multiple lawsuits. His professional credentials were revoked, and his reputation destroyed. The man who had once ridiculed João Pedro on the runway now couldn't even get a job as a consultant for third-rate companies. "Revenge was not my goal," João Pedro confided to Patricia during the inauguration of the Community Technology Development Center, funded by Asas Duradas. "Justice, yes, and visibility too." And the center, located in the same neighborhood where João Pedro had grown up, offered advanced technical training for young people without access to quality formal education. Under his guidance, 3 revolutionary patents had already emerged from the program's students. "You know what's ironic?" Patricia asked, observing a group of teenagers working on a prototype. "If Carlos had simply shared the credit with you, he would still be a director. Greed makes people completely underestimate the potential of others." Even more surprising was the proposal Patricia made to João Pedro 3 months after his hiring. It wasn't just a management position she was offering, but a partnership, literal and figurative. "I thought she was crazy when she suggested a merger," João Pedro confessed on a highly rated TV show. "Not a marriage, as some speculated, but a business merger. My small engineering company, which I had kept running in my garage during those 5 years as a mechanic, now was worth 30% of Asas Duradas." The old directors who had laughed at him that morning on the runway were no longer laughing. Some resigned, unable to work under the new leadership. Others remained, learning the hard way that talent and competence have no color. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, Patricia organized a special event. All employees were invited to the launch of a new propulsion system developed by João Pedro's team, a technology that would reduce fuel consumption in commercial aircraft. "A year ago, many of you witnessed a black man being ridiculed while saving lives," Patricia began her speech. "Today, that same man is saving our industry, our planet, and most importantly, he is saving dreams that could have been stifled by prejudice." João Pedro scanned the audience, identifying faces that had once treated him with disdain and who now applauded him with a standing ovation. He felt no particular pride in this transformation. He knew some applauded out of self-interest, not genuine conversion. But for the young engineers from diverse backgrounds who now occupied positions previously unattainable for them, because of them, the effort was worth every second. In the front row, an unexpected figure, his mother, Dona Maria, 72, who had worked as a cleaner in large company offices her entire life so he could go to college. Her eyes were teary. True change, João Pedro concluded in his speech, doesn't happen when people like me break through barriers and achieve success. It happens when we open doors and ensure that talent isn't wasted by absurd prejudices. True justice isn't just individual, it's structural. The story of the mechanic who became a co-owner inspired an entire generation of young engineers from marginalized communities. Similar programs began to emerge in other corporations, partly due to social pressure, partly because they saw Asas Douradas' unquestionable success after embracing diversity not as a slogan, but as a concrete practice. Success did not erase the scars of a lifetime of prejudice, but it gave João Pedro a powerful platform to transform indignation into positive impact. And as he watched the young students in his community center, he knew that the greatest victory was not his position or his fortune, but the look in those young eyes, unimpeded by the doubt he had carried for decades. The best response to prejudice was never individual success, but creating a path for others to follow, free from the obstacles that almost destroyed his dreams.